Hello and welcome back to this week's episode of the We Are Birmingham Blue preview. I'm Luke Stokes and joining me this week is James Cox from the BS3 Talk podcast. James, how are you, mate? And welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. I am good. How about yourself?
Yeah, not too bad, mate. Not too bad. Thanks for joining us. I guess people call this one the BCFC derby, maybe? Is that what we'd say?
Yeah, but you're kind of the BCFC, I think.
I
The
think,
big BCFC anyway.
yeah, I didn't want to say that, but I think I'll take that one. Yeah, so I'll take that one. I guess going into the game, mate, it's
Just quickly, we've got bcfc.co.uk, so the website, I
maybe.
don't know what your website is, but
Maybe. Well, listen, maybe that's an argument for another day. I reckon I was going to say we'll do the talking on the pitch, but I don't think Blues have been doing much talking on the pitch at all in recent weeks. And neither of Bristol City, I think, would be fair to say as well. Both teams not in the best run of form, to say the least, coming into this game. And I think, where we'll start is just asking you how you found this season. There's a lot of opinions from myself and other people around Blues, but I think it'd be good to get a gauge of how Bristol City fans are feeling this season, and how you feel you've done so far.
it's been action-packed, to say the least. I think we won our first 4 games in a row in the league. We thought we were going up. Obviously, Lee Johnson was sacked at the end of last season. And, things were looking up. And then injuries struck. Now, we're quite used to getting injuries. We have quite a few injury-prone players. But I think it totals to about 19 first-team players have at some point been injured this season, which completely derailed Dean Holden's plans for the majority of the season, which is probably why he got the sack, to be honest, in the end. He just couldn't get the results. He didn't have the players. And now, we're under Nigel Pearson, which I would not have predicted a few months ago, even a few weeks ago.
No. I think Nigel Pearson's it's a great appointment, and to be honest, I mean, there's been a lot of talk about Blues and what we should do in our managerial situation. And I think Nigel Pearson, before he was appointed Bristol City manager, would have been a name which a lot of fans would have been more than happy with to come into Blues and try and steady the ship there. So, going into that, what have you found with Nigel Pearson? What's he brought to Bristol City in the last few weeks? I mean, he's won a couple of games, you've lost a couple of games, been pretty mixed under him, but what have you noticed in terms of improvements and changes under him?
I think in terms of him as a manager, it's been genuine knowledge and experience of the game. We've got a history of managerial appointments that, are unproven. We haven't really appointed a proven manager for probably a decade. Even Lee Johnson, who, to be fair to the club, turned out well, had only managed for a few seasons, not even that. So to bring in someone like Nigel Pearson was a shock to the fan base, to be honest. Didn't quite expect us to pull out such an impressive appointment. In terms of on the pitch, I wouldn't say we've seen a huge difference. I think we've just seen players play for a new manager. It's that audition period when the new gaffers come in, you want to get your spot nailed down. And I think it's quite an interesting end to the season for us because it's basically players playing for their spot in the team, potentially at the club for some of them, because there was a lot of talk all season about the fact that some of them just aren't fit to wear the shirt, aren't playing at all anywhere near their highest level. And I think one thing that Nigel Pearson brings is the ability to spot the uncommitted ones and, get them out as soon as possible. You can't forget that Nigel Pearson's only here until the end of the season, currently. But I think it's likely that he'll stay on. He sounds like he wants to stay on. And I'd be very surprised if the club didn't keep him on. So it's a bit of a feel-good factor around the club, finally, after quite a long season. But it's early days.
I think with Nigel Pearson, I think a lot of people were surprised when he got sacked from Watford, weren't they? He's obviously a manager who can do it at this level and even higher in the Premier League. He's proved that. He's got a good managerial CV. And I think that's positive from Bristol City point of view if he's already talking about extending his stay or giving hints and tips. And, inklings towards that fact that he does want to stay on until the end of the season. Because I think if he's a manager that, I think if he had a good full pre-season with the team, got his own transfer windows, a couple of those under his belt, I think he could really build a good, strong championship team. And from the outside looking in, Bristol City, appear to have a good squad of players and have that, the potential there to be that. And like I said, that you're in around the playoffs for parts of last season and this season, so it's not like a shock to anybody if Bristol City did start performing well. But this season, we'll touch on the form briefly because it's not something both teams really want to talk about. Bristol City, surprisingly, after looking the last 10 games, are bottom of the form table with 2 wins and 8 defeats, and Blues are 19th, which is less surprising with two wins, 3 draws and 5 defeats. So just talk us through that, mate. What's been going on in the early part of the season and more recently?
The funny thing is, the 2 wins were as soon as Nigel Pearson came in. I think we beat Borough and Swansea away 3-1, and they just seemed complete anomalies. So we thought we turned our season around, and then we've lost the last couple of games. I think it sort of ties into what I mentioned earlier about the injuries, which have just been ridiculous. They've just been non-stop. That definitely played a part towards, the severe downturn in form. And then you also look at Dean Holden's credentials as a manager, and the fact that he actually didn't have any when we appointed him. And, there were players he wanted to build the squad around. I know he wanted to build the squad around Liam Walsh, who hasn't played a single minute this season due to injuries, finally in the under-23s now. Players like him that, he just couldn't get access to because they were injured all season. And it meant, we lost some crucial players like Andy Vyman to injury. He did his ACL in. He was a striker who'd been moved into centre mid, but it was working for Dean Holden. Same with Callum O'Dowda was being used in the middle, which, players that shouldn't be midfielders, because we have a lot of midfielders, but they were working for Holden, and then they just got injured for prolonged periods. O'Dowda's been injured since the turn of the new year as well. So pretty much every player that Dean Holden had turned to, make us good, had got injured. Jamie Patterson as well. They're just coming to me as I talk. They just sort of got long, sustained injuries that just completely derailed any of Dean Holden's plans. And I think that, at the end of the day, that mixed with his inexperience, because he'd never managed a team before. I think he took a few Walsall games back in the day. It was just, a concoction for a complete downturn in form. And for a while, I think it looked similar to sort of Hull last season. We looked like there's always one team that plummets, isn't there, in the Championship? Mm-hmm. And we did think it was going to be us. And to an extent it is. But I think the appointment of Nigel Pearson has just about caught us in time and stopped us from being down there with you lot.
Yeah, to be honest, I think the list of players that you've mentioned there, Walsh, Patterson, O'Dowda, if they're the team, important parts of your team, and you're looking to build around them and they all get injured, I think any squad in the league would suffer when those sorts of players do get injured. So that's a completely understandable thing. And then, like you said, mixed in with the managerial inexperience, that's not going to be a good formula moving forward and trying to climb the table. I think as well, you've got some great players in that team offensively. I mean, experienced players and proven players. Jeju up front, you've got Chris Martin, you've got Naki Wells. I mean, I think Jeju's got 10 goals this season and Naki Wells has got 9. So is it more of a defensive thing, or is it just, you've not been able to field that team every week, the strongest team possible? It's been injury by injury, and it's just been an unsettled team which ultimately hasn't been performing on the pitch.
It's been the case for a few years now that we've sort of struggled for goals. Not in an awful way, because we're normally up there, we'll think we're awful and then we'll look at the table and say, oh, we've got a similar amount of goals to Brentford or to this team. But it just seems that we cannot marry the two, a defensive performance and an attacking performance, and put them into one game. I think we've kept one clean sheet, maybe 2 in the last 18 league games or something like that. It's not awful defensively. We're not shipping loads of goals. It's just the odd 1, the odd 2, and they just trickle and they add up. And you get to a point, I think we've got negative goal difference because we got absolutely walloped by Watford 6-0, which was near the end of Dean Holden's tenure. And that was very much sort of symbolic of what was happening to that defence, because it's another area where we've had lots of injuries. I know Nathan Baker, absolutely top-class Championship centre-back, one of the best defenders in the league on his day, but he's probably never played more than 8-10 games in a row for us because he's just injured. He's another player that's been injured all season. Captain Thomas Callas has been in and out of injury. He's finally found some form. But it was interesting that he said at the end of a press conference just before Dean Holden was sacked, he was almost shipping the blame towards the attackers. He was claiming that, you know, the defenders were doing all they could to keep goals out, but the midfield and the attack weren't doing enough. They weren't pulling their weight. So it's a very interesting dynamic. You mentioned the attackers we've got some real talented and goal-hungry strikers in Wales and Gigi. I think Chris Martin made a good impression when he came in. Again, he's injured at the moment. But there's no pace, there's no dynamism in that team. We lost Eliasson in the summer, who notched up double figures in assists last season. And then you're left with pretty much Antoine Semenyo as our only sort of, you know, pacey, I've said it before, pacey, dynamic player, someone who's going to do something out of nothing, a turn of pace, drop the shoulder. We just don't have any of them, and I think that's what makes us so hard to watch sometimes.
Yeah,
is it's just lump it to a striker, play a long ball, play it into feet, and you might get a little bit of good play. But I think that's where Casey Palmer has come in and done really well for us since the turn of the new year. I think he is someone who can carry this team on his back, you know, win fouls, cheeky little touches here and there. He scored from a corner the other week. I think he's the man at the moment that can, you know, turn that round. But we really need some new players in the summer that can bring us some pace and some skill.
Yeah, every single individual you've gone through there seems to me to be an established Championship player who could be playing for any number of teams in the league. So again, it goes back to that thing of not being able to field all those players within 111 and keeping them all fully fit. So at the start of the season, I'm guessing with that squad, maybe not so much when, you know, Dean Holden was there and you didn't have the managerial experience of promotion, but were you thinking at the start of the season maybe we could go up in the playoffs? And then what's changed now, even though Nigel Pearson has come in? I mean, if you talk about the table, you are literally banging mid-table. You're 13 points off relegation and 13 points off the playoffs. So, you know, what is the goal now for the end of the season? Is it those players to prove to Nigel Pearson that, do you know what, we have got a good squad here, stay around for next season and we'll have a go at getting promoted when you can build your own team? Is it obviously win as many games as possible, but with only 11 games to go, that gap's probably a bit too large now for you to go and get the playoffs? So what are you really thinking towards the back end of the season now with 11 games to go?
I think the start of the season was weird. I think us and Reading got out of the blocks really quickly. Obviously, Reading have managed to sort of stay up and around there. There was definite hope for us that, you know, it could have been playoffs. Last season was the season when we were supposed to, you know, get playoffs, have a chance of promotion. Never quite worked out. So we thought, you know, carry that slight momentum into this season. It starts well, and then, you know, the injuries just start to pile up. As for the rest of the season, I think it's now just try and impress Nigel Pearson. As for the club, try and tie Nigel Pearson down. And if you're a player, you're trying to, you know, impress him, because there might be close to double digits players that are out of contract in the summer. And when you instantly look at the list, you're probably only keeping 3 or 4. So there are some players there that really need to, you know, get into gear and show Nigel Pearson, show the board why they should be here next season. In terms of squad depth, we're in a decent position. I think for us, it's more, you know, we lack squad depth in certain areas. For example, we've got about 1 million midfielders, but not a single winger. We've got 3-4 strikers, but 1 right back. So it's a very strange dynamic in terms of squad depth, because I think people look at our squad and say, we've got some established players in there, and we do, but when you look at Jack Hunt at right back, there really is no one to test him or to compete for that spot. Because Steven Sessegnon on loan is having to fill in for left back, where we've had 4-5 injuries. So there's no one testing Jack Hunt. So he's happy to just play. He knows he's going to play week in, week out. And that's just one example of, I think, quite a few in our team at the moment. So the rest of the season, I think Nigel Pearson will just, drill it into them that you need to perform. Otherwise, you're not going to be in my team next season.
So it sounds to me as if the sort of pressure's off now in terms of performances. It's more in terms of results, and it's more about performances and showing why they should be around next season, going into next season and part of that squad. I think obviously Blues is a completely different situation. We need performances and results now. And to be honest, I wouldn't be too fussed if we weren't getting the performances as long as we were grinding out the results at this stage of the season. But sadly, in recent weeks, we've not been able to marry the two at all. Really, we've had some good games and some good spells in games, and it looked like we were making some progress going into the Barnsley game, last week. And then we go and turn in a very average, to say the least, performance, not very inspiring. And when you're down the bottom, that's not the sort of performance you need to be putting in. I'm not saying we were expecting to go into the Barnsley game and turn them over, but we wanted to show a little bit more, and we didn't really do that. So it's interesting that in comparing both teams going into Saturday, maybe that'll work in Blues' favour. The result necessarily to Bristol City is not what they're going for. They might not give that extra 10-15% if they're 1-0 up or 1-1 to hold on to the points. So maybe that's me being a bit optimistic from a Blues point of view going into Saturday's game. But, like I said, that's how mentality works in football. And as we know, I'm sure you do, the psychology of the players often has an effect of the results on the pitch moving forward. So we'll see what happens with that one. As someone looking in on Blues, James, what have you seen much of us this season? Have you got an opinion on Blues? Have you managed to watch us? What are your thoughts?
My main involvement with Birmingham City this season is being bored on a Saturday night and going on to out of context Birmingham pages and just reading the comments and what Karanka said that night. That's genuinely what's happened. I think from an outside perspective, I have no idea how you're still in the Championship after several years. I remember you beat us on the final day in 16, 17.
Redknapp, Jay Adams. Yeah.
Yeah. And I don't understand how you're still, afloat. I think you've avoided being the absolute capitulation this season. I think that's Sheffield Wednesday. And then you've also got Wycombe, haven't you, who are just less than they're just quite bad. And then it's just a fight now, isn't it? I don't know who else is quite in the mix, but obviously you, Rotherham, I think Coventry are kind of in there and thereabouts.
Huddersfield as well, on a terrible run.
Yeah, Huddersfield are awful because they lost a few key men to injuries.
Yeah.
It looks torrid at the moment. I didn't really think Karanka was a brilliant appointment. I don't think he's awful. I think he could have got worse, but definitely could have got someone a little more inspiring. But the one thing I would have thought you would have got from Karanka is a bit more solidity than you've had. I think it's going to be a very interesting battle for relegation. But I probably would just back you to stay up just because you just have the knack. Rotherham have the knack of going down. Coventry, they haven't been in this position for a while. So, they might be inexperienced. I think what you mentioned about Saturday's game, the dynamic could be quite strange because our players are sort of playing for themselves and their position, whereas yours are playing for the club. They're playing for your status, which I think could clash quite strangely because players obviously care about themselves, and it just depends how much your lot care about, the club. But it will certainly make an interesting game. Not sure watchable, but interesting. Yeah.
Definitely. I think you've already seen a clip going around on Twitter from the Barnsley game. You touched on watchable football there. There was a 2-minute clip going around this week of the ball basically being in the air for head tennis for 2 minutes straight. And that's the sort of football which, I suppose when you're down the bottom, you just want to get rid of everything, and the nerves are there, and like we touched on, psychology there as well. I don't want to make a mistake rather than I want to try something and influence a game, and that's happened on too many occasions for Blues, in my opinion, this season. Not many players have really tried to get control of the ball in the game and say, right, I'm going to try and dictate the game now for us, and create something. And I think that is, you could talk about tactics all day long, and a lot of things to do with Odd Cranker. I don't agree with the tactics that he's deployed this season. But also it is about the players on the pitch, and ultimately they're the ones making decisions on the ball and off the ball, and ultimately a lot of those decisions this season have been the ones that have cost us points at vital times. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see it Saturday's game, and how both teams approach it, but also, like you said, how each player sort of plays with their situation. Bristol City playing for a contract to impress a new manager, and Blues playing for Championship survival. And these players have, like you said, we've been in and around it for the last couple of seasons now. And if we do go down, there's not many players in that team who, you'd go to League One and someone in the Championship will be saying straight away, yeah, we've got to snap them up. They're a proven Championship player, because we've been around this situation for a number of years now. So clubs will know that. So it will be interesting Saturday. Going into this one on Saturday, mate, have you got any team news from a Bristol City perspective? I mean, from a Blues point of view, we've not really got much to update. Sam Cosgrove back on the bench for us last week. Not yet to see more than 10 minutes from him in a game through no fault of his own. Just the fact that he's come in, got injured, and Karanka didn't really stick him on when he was fit. So is there anything from Bristol City point of view we should look out for going into this one?
Well, we only got 2 injuries in last week's game. But they were both head injuries. It was a very strange first half. We had all 3 of our midfielders go off. One was a tactical decision, and then 2 got head injuries. So Adam Naj and Zach Viner, I would assume, will be back in the team. They're the ones that went off with head injuries. But I would assume they're back and okay. Other than that, it's just the main culprits who were injured. Hoping mainly that youngster Aurora Edwards is back, because he came in for a couple of games. He's like a sparkly young winger. He was on loan at Barnsley, Grimsby for the first half of the season. Hopefully he'll be back in the squad, because he impressed for a couple of games, then had to self-isolate and then got injured. So it'd be nice to see him back, because you could see a youngster like him getting a start. But other than that, yeah, I think you'll see a similar team out for us.
Super. I think from a Blues point of view, like I said, not much to touch on, but players to look out for then before we go for this week's episode. I mean, you touched on A, you didn't want to say too many because you didn't think there'd be too many causing us any threats on Saturday. So I think from Blues perspective, going into it, I think the away game at Bristol City was one of our better performances this season. We did get a victory at your place. I think it was before Christmas in December. And Ivan Sanchez played well. Jeremy Bella looked good. Scott Hogan looked lively. So I think those front 3 will probably be, barring any injuries, the ones that start for us on Saturday. And I'd put down particularly Ivan Sanchez. He seemed to have the beating of your fullback in the game before Christmas. So hopefully he can do something for us. But what about yourself, mate, from a Bristol perspective? Who should Blue fans be wary of when you're in possession, and who can do some damage towards us?
I mentioned him before. It's got to be Casey Palmer. He's the only one that's sort of taken any game recently by the scruff of the neck. I think he did it in both the Borough and Swansea wins. He was at Swansea earlier in the season on loan, didn't perform for them, didn't really get much game time, and he came back with a point to prove. And I think Nigel Pearson is someone that's going to get the most out of him. I think he likes his creative type that can run a game if he needs to. And Casey Palmer is one of them. You've got Nakiraz and Framara Juju, who can be static. They can also, because they're good players, they can make smart runs. And if you make a smart run, Casey Palmer is going to find you. I remember when we were on fire at the start of the 1920 season, he played a pinpoint ball through to Tommy Rowe at your place. I think that was the equaliser on that day. So, we know what he possesses. You just got to give him the runners and give him the space. And he will win clever little fouls and, cheeky little touches here and there. I'm just terrified of Scott Hogan, to be honest, because he didn't score in the reverse fixture. So he's bound to score this time.
Well, I hope so, mate, from a Blues point of view. He's been in okay goal scoring form for us recently. He got a couple away at Bournemouth. He's probably our top scorer this season, but around 4 or 5 goals rather than the 10 and 9 that Jeju and Wells have got, and that really does show what Blues have been about this season, not scoring enough goals but also conceding too many. With that in mind, then, mate, we'll finish the show off this week. Score prediction from yourself. How do you see this one going on Saturday? And like I said, how do you see the game going, and what to look out for from a Bristol City point of view?
I genuinely don't know, because I think it depends really how we turn up, I think, because we'll expect, not the best football from you lot, but you'll be wanting the result. You won't really care about the performance. Whereas I think Nigel Pearson will go with the intention of playing well, probably, not to be disrespectful, but beating you comfortably, because, that's what we should be doing with the players we have. But, it just hasn't happened. It didn't happen at home. I always like the sort of Zizou dynamic. I remember the spat with, was it Harley Dean a couple of seasons ago? There's always that extra edge, I feel like, especially when Fam's playing. So I'd probably back him to get on the score sheet. But I also think Scott Hogan will, as I said, also score. So I think I'll go with a 1-1. But I wouldn't be surprised if you beat us comfortably either.
Okay. You mentioned Harley Dean there. He did score the winner, I think, at your place. So maybe that's where you've got the victory from Scott Hogan. He's probably on a similar number of goals this season. For Blues, I've gone with a 1-0 Blues. I don't know where that optimism's come from. We didn't play well at Barnsley last weekend, in my opinion. It didn't look like scoring. I think before Christmas, away at Bristol City, set pieces was something we caused you a few problems with. We did get the winner from one of those. I'm thinking Karanka's going to keep it tight in the first half. We're not going to play too expansively, and then go into the second half, and maybe we can nick one. So I've gone with the 1-0 Blues, but I do think Scott Hogan will probably score, actually. So a 1-0 Blues with Scott Hogan getting on the score sheet this week will be perfect for us. Not so perfect for you. But yeah, that's how I see it going, mate.
Honestly, I don't mind anymore. I'm happy to give you a win, give you a chance of staying up.
Listen, we need it. We need it.
Get us back into grounds, and I'll care more. No, I think I would agree with you, but I'm going to be more positive and say we're going to get a point.
Of course. Absolutely. Well, you got to be positive, James, going to Saturday, and all the best Saturday, mate. Obviously, I hope the best team on the day wins, but like I said, Blues really do need the points more than Bristol City at the minute, so let's hope it's us. Thanks for joining us today, James. It's been great. Really appreciate you coming on, mate, and taking the time out to speak to us.
Cheers. Good luck for the season.
So that was James from the BS3 Talk podcast. Like I said, thank you to him for joining us this week on the We Are Birmingham Blue preview. If you haven't already, give the latest We Are Birmingham podcast a listen on all good podcast providers. And until next time, hopefully Blues get the points on Saturday. Keep right on.